Imagine a system that was built to give a voice to the voiceless, to make sure that the most marginalized people in a country finally get a seat at the decision-making table. Okay, now imagine that very same system gets twisted into a private ladder for the powerful, for their families and their big money backers. Well, that's the incredible story we're digging into today, all based on some deep reporting by Online Khabar. All right, let's dive right in. This slide just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? On one hand, you have the promise, a system for the representation of oppressed communities. And on the other, the stark reality of what it's become, what the source actually calls a Republican dynasty. Power isn't being passed down by royal bloodline anymore, but through political connections. So, to really get what went wrong, we first have to understand the dream, the original idea. The proportional representation system, or PR system, came about after the People's Movement in 2006. And its goal was really beautiful and simple: to create a parliament that actually looked and felt like the country itself, a rainbow or Indreni legislature, a place where groups that could almost never win a direct head-to-head election would finally have their voices heard. But here's the twist. What was meant to be a pathway for the voiceless has, according to this analysis, turned into something completely different. It's become a safe ladder, a bahyang for the political elite to just climb their way into parliament without ever having to risk a direct vote from the people. So who's actually climbing this ladder? Well, take a look at these names. These aren't exactly political newcomers, are they? We're talking about seasoned politicians, former ministers, people who have won direct elections before. But now, they're choosing the guaranteed seat that the PR list offers, completely bypassing the very democratic process they used to be a part of. So the big question is, how is this actually happening? Well, what's really fascinating is that this source breaks it down into 4 distinct patterns, 4 faces of distortion, if you will, that show exactly how this system is being misused, step by step. First up, and it's a big one, is just blatant nepotism. Seats that were designed for marginalized communities are instead being handed out to the children, spouses, and relatives of top party leaders. And the example cited here, the daughter of the current president, is a pretty clear signal of how political families are cashing in on a system that was never meant for them. Second, the PR list has basically become a management tool for internal party politics. Party bosses use these guaranteed seats to reward their loyal followers and to keep powerful leaders of different factions happy. So it becomes less about representing the people and a lot more about holding on to power inside the party itself. Third, and this one is really concerning, is the influence of money. The report points to a practice where parliamentary seats are, allegedly, handed over to business figures in return for hefty financial contributions to the party. In the case of Rajyalakshmi Golchaha, who actually spoke publicly about her contributions, has kind of become the textbook example of this problem. And finally, we're seeing a newer trend, using celebrities. Parties are putting famous people on their PR lists, not because they represent a specific marginalized group, but because their star power might attract more votes for the party's entire list. And it really makes you wonder, right? Does a famous face truly represent the interests of a community that's been left behind? Now, it's so important to understand this next part. This isn't about pointing fingers at 1 or 2 bad apples in a single political party. The reporting makes it very clear that this is a deep, systemic problem, a complete capture of the system by the well-connected. And this table, wow, it just makes the point impossible to argue with. From the big parties like Congress and the UML, all the way down to smaller ones, you see the exact same patterns repeating over and over. Sons of former presidents, nieces of party leaders, husbands and wives, even fathers and daughters. It's happening right across the entire political spectrum. When a problem gets this obvious and this widespread, it can't go unnoticed forever. It became so blatant that it ended up before the highest court in the country, and that led to a really huge moment for Nepal's democracy. So here's how it all went down. In late 2079, a case was filed to challenge this very distortion. And then, just over a year later, in Chaitra of 2080, the Supreme Court's constitutional bench came out with a powerful verdict that was pretty much impossible to ignore. And the court just nailed the problem with this incredibly sharp phrase. They identified a cream-skimming tendency, a taramara praviti. What does that mean? It means even when a seat is reserved for a specific marginalized community, it's the most powerful, the wealthiest, and the most well-connected people within that same community who get the seat. The truly marginalized get left behind all over again. Now, the court didn't just criticize. It gave clear, legally binding orders. It told lawmakers to rewrite the laws, to stop nominating the same powerful figures again and again, and to start focusing on people who are actually backward, economically, socially, you name it, not just people who check the right box on paper. And let's be clear, this was not a suggestion. This ruling had the full force of law. And yet, here we are. This is maybe the most shocking part of the whole story. Despite that crystal clear, legally binding ruling from the nation's highest court, the source reports that in the latest round of nominations, the political parties have basically just shrugged and carried on as if nothing ever happened, continuing the exact same distorted practices. So when you see this kind of open disregard for a Supreme Court ruling, it brings us to a much bigger question. This isn't just about an electoral system anymore, is it? It's about the fundamental health of Nepal's democracy and the whole future of the inclusive government that so many people fought and sacrificed for. And that leaves us all with this final, really heavy question to think about. When a tool that was specifically designed to lift up the marginalized gets captured by the elite to just lock in their own power, what does that say about the promise of democracy? And what is the path forward for everyday citizens who still believe in that original inclusive dream?